Evil has a face we think we know. We see it in the headlines, in the mugshots that become iconic, in the names that are whispered like curses through generations. Bundy, Gacy, Dahmer. Their stories are etched into our collective consciousness, cautionary tales of the monsters who walk among us. But these figures, as terrifying as they are, represent only the evil that has been caught, cataloged, and commodified into popular culture. What if I told you that the history we study, the grand tapestry of kings and queens, wars and revolutions, is haunted by shadows far darker than these? What if the most prolific, the most vicious, the most purely evil killers are not the ones we know, but the ones we have forgotten? They are the phantoms whose crimes were too vast, too strange, or too deeply embedded in the fabric of their time to be easily understood or remembered. These are the killers hidden in history. Their arenas were not darkened alleyways or suburban homes, but feudal castles, sprawling empires, and the very institutions meant to protect the vulnerable. They operated in eras before forensic science, before criminal profiling, before the term serial killer even existed. They were noblemen, cult leaders, matriarchs, and caregivers, hiding their monstrosity behind masks of respectability and power. This is a journey into those shadows. We will unearth the stories of 4 individuals separated by centuries and continents, yet united by a capacity for cruelty that defies comprehension. We will not only examine their crimes, but the worlds that allowed them to flourish, the societal norms, the fears, and the blind spots that enabled their reigns of terror to go unchecked for so long. Prepare to meet the monsters you were never taught about in school. We begin in the heart of 15th century France, a land torn apart by a century of war, where a national hero, a saintly warrior who fought beside Joan of Arc, would descend into a personal hell of such depravity that his name would become a byword for pure evil. Our first story begins not in darkness, but in glory. It is the year 1429, and France is a nation on its knees, fractured and bleeding under the weight of the 100 Years' War against England. The French spirit is all but broken, its armies demoralized, and its future hanging by the thinnest of threads. Into this desperate landscape steps a figure of seemingly divine purpose, a young peasant girl from Domremy who would come to be known as Joan of Arc. And at her side, a young, brilliant, and fiercely loyal nobleman is Gilles de Rais. He is everything a 15th century aristocrat should be: handsome, wealthy, courageous, and a masterful military strategist. Born into one of the most powerful families in Brittany, Gilles commands respect on and off the battlefield. He is a beacon of French chivalry in a time of desperate need. He fights with Joan at the legendary Siege of Orleans, a pivotal battle that turns the tide of the war. He is there when she leads the Dauphin, Charles VII, to be crowned king at Rheims, a moment of national triumph. For his valor and unwavering loyalty, Gilles de Rais is appointed Marshal of France, the highest military honor in the nation. He is a hero, a savior, a man touched by greatness. But the light that surrounds Joan of Arc is fleeting. In 1431, she is captured by the English, tried for heresy, and burned at the stake. For France, it is a tragedy. For Gilles de Rais, it is a cataclysm. The loss of his comrade in arms, the symbol of his glorious past, seems to extinguish a light within him, leaving a void that would soon be filled by an insatiable darkness. After Joan's death, Gilles retreats from the royal court and the theater of war. He returns to his vast estates, including the formidable Château de Tiffauges, a fortress of gray stone and imposing towers. Here, far from the judgment of the king, he begins to live a life of staggering extravagance. He surrounds himself with a retinue of over 200 knights, squires, and priests, maintaining a court that rivals the king's own. He commissions lavish theatrical productions, spending fortunes on costumes, sets, and actors. He patronizes musicians and artists, filling his halls with beauty and sound. But this opulence is a frantic, desperate performance. He is spending his way through a colossal inheritance at an alarming rate, selling off lands and castles piece by piece to fuel his insatiable need for spectacle and distraction. As his wealth dwindles, desperation sets in. Gilles, a man of faith and a hero of a holy war, turns to a darker path for salvation. He becomes obsessed with alchemy, the forbidden art of turning base metals into gold. He believes it is the only way to restore his fortune and maintain his lavish lifestyle. He summons alchemists and sorcerers from across Europe, promising them riches in exchange for the secret of the Philosopher's Stone. His primary collaborator is a man named Francesco Prelati, an Italian priest and self-proclaimed magician. Prelati convinces Gilles that the secrets of alchemy can only be unlocked through demonic pacts. He claims to be able to summon a powerful demon named Baron, who demands offerings in exchange for knowledge and wealth. The castle of Tifages, once a symbol of military might, transforms into a laboratory for the dark arts. Late-night rituals are held in the castle's secluded chambers. Incantations are chanted, circles of protection are drawn, and incense heavy with strange and exotic scents fills the air. Gilles and his inner circle attempt to conjure spirits, seeking forbidden knowledge and a magical solution to their very worldly problem of debt. But the demon Baron, according to Prelati, is not easily appeased. Prelati tells Gilles that the demon demands more than just prayers and incense. It requires the ultimate sacrifice, the most potent offering to appease the forces of darkness, the hands, the hearts, and the eyes of innocent children. It is here, at this horrifying intersection of desperation, superstition, and burgeoning madness, that Gilles de Rais crosses a threshold from which there is no return. He begins to use his power and authority, not to protect the people of his lands, but to prey upon them. His retainers, loyal men who once followed him into battle, now become his hunters. They scour the surrounding villages and countryside, looking for children, often young boys, fair-haired and beautiful, who can be lured back to the castle. They use promises of employment, a warm meal, or a few coins to entice the children of poor peasants. Sometimes they are simply taken by force, snatched from a roadside or a field. Their disappearances barely noted in a world where life is cheap and children often vanish due to famine, disease, or accident. They are brought to the castle and they are never seen again. Inside the cold stone walls of Tifages, unspeakable horrors unfold. The children are brought before Gilles, who, according to later testimony, would first admire their beauty, perhaps dress them in fine clothes, and then descend into a frenzy of sadistic violence. The man who was once a national hero becomes a monster, indulging in acts of torture and murder that are stomach-churning in their cruelty. His accomplices, men like his cousins Gilles de Sillé and Roger de Briqueville, are not just passive observers, they are active participants. They help procure the victims and dispose of the remains. The bodies are burned in the castle's massive fireplaces, dismembered and buried in hidden pits within the walls, or thrown into the castle moat, their small bones mingling with the refuse. For nearly a decade, this reign of terror continues. The number of victims climbs, with estimates ranging from dozens to several hundred. Rumors begin to circulate among the peasantry. They whisper of strange lights in the castle windows at night, a foul-smelling smoke rising from the chimneys at odd hours, and, most terrifyingly, of the children who go to the castle and simply cease to exist. Fear hangs heavy over the lands controlled by Gilles de Rais. Parents warn their children to stay away from the roads, to flee from any knight or squire wearing the marshal's colors. But Gilles is a powerful man, a war hero, and a member of the high nobility. Who would dare to accuse the Marshal of France of such monstrous crimes? The local authorities are either in his employ or too terrified to act. However, Gilles' arrogance and desperation eventually become his undoing. In a brazen act of aggression, he kidnaps a priest during a dispute over the ownership of a castle. This is a foolish mistake. While the disappearance of peasant children can be ignored, an attack on a clergyman is a direct assault on the authority of the church, an institution even more powerful than the nobility. Jean V, the Duke of Brittany, and the Bishop of Nantes see their chance. They have heard the rumors and have grown wary of their powerful and erratic neighbor. The kidnapping of the priest gives them the legal pretext they need to launch a full-scale investigation into the affairs of Gilles de Rais. In September of 1440, Gilles is arrested. An ecclesiastical court led by the Bishop of Nantes begins to gather evidence. They send investigators into the villages surrounding Gilles' castles, and for the first time, the terrified parents of the missing children are given a voice. One by one, they come forward with heartbreaking stories of their lost sons and daughters, all last seen in the company of the marshal's men. The testimony is damning. A pattern emerges, a horrifying map of predation that stretches across the region. But the court needs more than the word of peasants. They need a confession. They turn their attention to Gilles' closest accomplices, his loyal retainers who helped him carry out his atrocities. Under the threat of torture, their wall of silence crumbles. Men like Poitou and Henriette, Gilles' body servants, confess everything. They provide detailed, graphic accounts of the murders, describing the methods, the rituals, and the chilling, detached cruelty of their master. They lead investigators to the places where the bodies were hidden. Within the walls and beneath the floors of the Château de Tiffauges, searchers make a gruesome discovery. They unearth pits filled with the fragmented, charred bones of dozens of children. The physical evidence corroborates the testimony, painting a picture of systematic slaughter on an industrial scale. The castle, once a symbol of power, is revealed to be a charnel house. Faced with the overwhelming evidence and the confessions of his men, Gilles de Rais at first remains defiant, cloaking himself in the privilege of his noble rank. He insults the court and refuses to recognize its authority. But when faced with excommunication and the very real threat of extreme torture, his resolve breaks. In a dramatic reversal, Gilles de Rais makes a full, public confession. He weeps openly in the courtroom, expressing remorse and begging for God's forgiveness. He recounts his crimes in horrifying detail, confirming the testimony of his servants and the fears of the local populace. He admits to the murder of more than 100 children, though the true number is likely far higher. On October 26, 1440, Gilles de Rais, Marshal of France, hero of the 100 Years' War, and companion of Joan of Arc, is sentenced to death. He is to be hanged and then burned. His two primary accomplices, Henriette and Poitou, are sentenced to the same fate. The once celebrated knight has become a reviled monster. His execution is a massive public spectacle. He walks to the gallows with a strange piety, urging the crowd to pray for his soul. In his final moments, he seems to embrace his damnation, playing the part of the repentant sinner with the same theatrical flair he once reserved for his courtly productions. He is hanged, and his body is cut down from the flames before it can be fully consumed, a small mercy granted due to his noble birth. The story of Gilles de Rais does not end with his death. It transforms into a legend, a dark fairy tale used to frighten children for centuries. Many scholars believe his story was the historical basis for the folktale of Bluebeard, the wealthy aristocrat who murders his wives and hides their bodies in a forbidden room. His case leaves an indelible stain on the history of France. It is a terrifying reminder that heroism and monstrosity can reside within the same soul, that power can corrupt absolutely, and that the darkest evils can hide behind the most respectable facades. The hero of Orleans is forever remembered not for his valor, but for the innocent blood that stained the stones of his castle. From the cold, dark castles of medieval Europe, we now travel forward 3 centuries and across the globe to a very different world. We arrive in 18th century India, a vibrant, sprawling subcontinent of ancient traditions, powerful empires, and burgeoning trade. It is a land of immense wealth and profound danger, especially for those who travel its long and winding roads. Merchants, soldiers, pilgrims, and families traverse these routes, carrying goods, money, and messages between bustling cities and remote villages. But for centuries, these travelers have been stalked by a silent, secret terror. They are hunted by a fraternity of killers so organized, so patient, and so deadly that they have become an almost mythical scourge, the Thuggee. The Thuggee are not common bandits. They are a highly organized, hereditary cult of ritual murderers who worship the Hindu goddess of destruction, Kali. They believe that they are divinely ordained to kill, not for mere profit, but as a religious duty. Each murder is a sacrifice to their goddess, an act of holy service. They operate in gangs, sometimes dozens or even hundreds strong. They are masters of deception, joining caravans of travelers under the guise of being fellow merchants or pilgrims. They are friendly, charming, and helpful, spending days or even weeks earning the trust of their intended victims, sharing meals, stories, and the hardships of the road. Their method is always the same, a brutally efficient ritual passed down through generations. They wait for the perfect moment, usually at night when the travelers are resting. At a signal from their leader, they strike. Each thug has an assigned target. They use a rumal, a yellow silk scarf weighted at one end. In a swift, silent motion, they loop it around their victim's neck and strangle them. There is no struggle, no cry for help. It is a silent, swift, and terrifyingly intimate form of murder. They never spill blood, as they believe it is offensive to Kali. After the victims are dead, they are stripped of their valuables, and their bodies are consecrated in a ritual before being buried in pre-dug graves, their resting places carefully disguised to leave no trace. For centuries, the Thuggee have operated with near impunity. Their secrecy, their organization, and the vastness of the Indian landscape make them almost impossible to track. Thousands of travelers vanish without a trace each year, their disappearances attributed to wild animals, disease, or common banditry. The Thuggee are a phantom menace, a whispered horror story among those who travel the roads. Into this world of ritualized murder and sacred violence, our second figure emerges. He is not just a member of this deadly cult. He is destined to become its most prolific and feared leader. His name is Thug Behram, and he will personally turn the roads of India into rivers of the dead. Born around 1765 in the Oudh region of north-central India, Behram is initiated into the Thuggee cult at a young age. It is his birthright, his family's profession. He is taught the secret language of the thugs, the intricate system of omens they follow, and, most importantly, the art of the rumal. He learns that to be a thug is to be a patient hunter. It requires an actor's skill to deceive, a priest's devotion to kill, and a soldier's discipline to remain silent. Behram possesses all of these qualities in abundance. He is intelligent, charismatic, and utterly ruthless. He quickly proves himself to be exceptionally skilled at strangulation. Behram rises through the ranks, earning the respect and fear of his fellow thugs. He becomes a jemadar, a leader of his own gang. He is known for his meticulous planning and his uncanny ability to read omens, which his followers believe makes him favored by the goddess Kali herself. Under his leadership, his gang becomes the most successful and deadly in all of India. Behram's reign of terror spans over 4 decades, from the late 18th to the early 19th century. During this time, the political landscape of India is in turmoil. The Mughal Empire is in turmoil, and the British East India Company is aggressively expanding its influence and control. This chaos is the perfect environment for the Thuggee to thrive. Behram and his gang operate primarily along the major trade route between Delhi and Jabalpur. They target large caravans, sometimes taking down groups of 30 or more people at once. Their methods are so refined that they can eliminate an entire party of travelers in a matter of minutes, melting back into the landscape before dawn, leaving behind nothing but an eerie silence. The scale of Behram's killing is staggering. During his later confession, he would claim to have been present at the murders of 931 people. He personally strangled at least 125 of them with his own rumal. He becomes a legend within the cult, a high priest of murder whose name is synonymous with death. For the victims, the experience is one of complete betrayal. Imagine spending a week on the road with a group of friendly, seemingly devout men. You share your food with them, you laugh at their jokes, you sleep beside them under the stars, believing you have found safety in numbers. And then, in your deepest sleep, the hands of your new friends become the instruments of your death. This psychological terror is a key component of the Thuggee's success. They do not just kill, they annihilate. They erase their victims from existence, taking their property and ensuring their bodies will never be found. Families back home wait for letters that never arrive, for loved ones who have simply vanished from the face of the earth. As the British East India Company consolidates its power, it can no longer ignore the problem of the disappearing travelers. The disruption to trade and the general state of lawlessness on the roads is a threat to their authority and their profits. They begin to hear more and more about the secret society of stranglers, a threat they initially dismiss as exaggerated folklore. But one British official, Captain William Henry Sleeman, takes the threat seriously. He is an administrator in the Sagar and Narbada territories, a region plagued by Thuggee activity. Sleeman is a methodical and determined man, and he makes it his life's mission to understand and eradicate the cult of the Thuggee. Sleeman begins a systematic campaign. He gathers intelligence, maps out the thugs' operational areas, and, most importantly, he devises a strategy to break their code of silence. He realizes that the only way to destroy the network is from within. He begins capturing thugs and offering them a deal. Confess, name your accomplices, and become an informant for the British, and you will be spared the gallows. This strategy, known as the approver system, is incredibly effective. Faced with their own execution, many thugs choose to talk. One by one, they begin to reveal the secrets of the cult. Their rituals, their leaders, their secret language, and the locations of their mass graves. For the first time, the British get a clear picture of the vast and ancient conspiracy they are facing. Through the testimony of these informants, one name keeps coming up again and again: Behram. He is described as the king of the thugs, the most cunning and deadly of them all. Sleeman makes capturing Behram his top priority, knowing that taking down the leader would be a fatal blow to the entire organization. Sleeman establishes the Thuggee and Dacoity Department in 1835, a dedicated police force with the sole purpose of hunting down the cult. His operations become a massive intelligence gathering effort, creating detailed genealogies of thug families and tracking their movements across the country. The net begins to close around Behram and his gang. Bayram, now an old man in his 70s, has been killing for half a century. He is a master of evasion, but even he cannot escape the systematic dragnet created by Sleeman. In 1839, acting on information from an approver, British forces track down and capture the most prolific killer in the history of the cult. In custody, Bayram, like many before him, becomes an informant. Perhaps seeing it as a way to secure a better fate, or perhaps out of a strange sense of pride in his life's work, he confesses everything. He provides the British with a chillingly detailed account of his career, listing his murders with the dispassionate accuracy of a clerk taking inventory. His confession is a horrifying window into the mind of a thug. He expresses no remorse, only a sense of professional accomplishment. He sees himself not as a murderer, but as an instrument of a divine will, a faithful servant of the goddess Kali. His 931 victims were not people to him, they were sacrifices. Bayram's testimony is crucial in helping Sleeman's department dismantle the remaining thuggy gangs. He provides names, dates, and locations that lead to hundreds of further arrests. He is the key that unlocks the final secrets of the cult. The information he provides leads to the conviction and execution of many of his former associates. Despite his cooperation, there is no clemency for Thug Bayram. His crimes are too immense, his reputation too monstrous. In 1840, at the age of 75, the man who had personally strangled over 100 people and presided over the deaths of nearly 1,000 is executed by hanging. The master of the Rumal meets his end at the end of a rope. Sleeman's campaign is a resounding success. Over the next decade, more than 3,000 thugs are captured. Around 500 are executed, and the rest are imprisoned for life or transported to penal colonies. The ancient cult of the Thuggee, which had terrorized the roads of India for centuries, is effectively destroyed. The story of Thug Bayram is a chilling example of how evil can be institutionalized, how murder can be sanctified by belief. He was not a lone psychopath, but a product of a deeply ingrained culture of ritual violence. His legacy is a stark reminder that the most dangerous monsters are often those who believe they are acting on the will of a higher power. We now leave the dusty roads of colonial India and cross the oceans to the promise of a new world, America in the late 19th century. It is an era of immense change and opportunity, a time when millions of immigrants are flocking to its shores in search of a better life. Our third story is about one such immigrant, a woman who pursued the American dream with a terrifying and murderous ambition. Her name was Belle Gunness, and she would become one of America's most enigmatic and brutal female serial killers. She was a Norwegian immigrant who settled in the quiet rural community of LaPorte, Indiana. To her neighbors, she was a large, imposing, but seemingly ordinary woman, a hard-working farmer and a mother. But behind the facade of her isolated farm, she was building a charnel house. Born Brynhild Paulsdottir Sturseth in Norway in 1859, she immigrated to the United States in 1881. She was a tall, powerfully built woman, standing nearly 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, a formidable presence in any room. She changed her name to Belle and soon married a fellow Norwegian immigrant, Mads Sorensen, in Chicago. Together, they ran a confectionery store, but their life was marked by a strange and convenient series of tragedies. Their store mysteriously burned down, and they collected the insurance money. 2 of their infant children died, both exhibiting symptoms of poisoning, and both had life insurance policies on them. Belle was profiting from death, a pattern that would define her life. In 1900, her husband Mads died on the very day that 2 life insurance policies on him happened to overlap. The first doctor to examine him suspected strychnine poisoning, but the family's doctor overruled him, claiming the cause of death was an enlarged heart. Bell collected the insurance money, a handsome sum of over $8,000, equivalent to $250,000 today. With her newfound wealth, Bell moved her remaining children out of the city. She bought a 42-acre farm on the outskirts of LaPorte, Indiana. It was a secluded property, perfect for a woman who craved privacy. She soon married again, this time to a local butcher named Peter Gunnis, a recent widower with 2 young daughters. But happiness, or the appearance of it, was short-lived. Within a week of the wedding, Peter's infant daughter died under mysterious circumstances while in Bell's care. Less than a year later, Peter himself was dead. Bell claimed a heavy sausage grinder had fallen from a shelf and struck him on the head. A coroner's inquest was convened, but ultimately they accepted her story. No one could believe a woman would be capable of such a thing. Once again, Bell collected the insurance money. She was now a wealthy widow, alone on her isolated farm with her children. It was at this point that her murderous enterprise began in earnest. She started placing advertisements in Norwegian-language newspapers across the Midwest, targeting a specific type of man. Her ads were written with a simple, alluring charm. She presented herself as a well-to-do widow looking for a kind, trustworthy gentleman to join her on her beautiful farm. She hinted at her wealth and her desire for companionship. But there was always a catch, a crucial requirement for any potential suitor. She insisted that any man who came to visit her must first sell all his possessions and bring his life savings with him, in cash. She explained this as a way to prove his sincerity and to invest in their shared future on the farm. She wrote, "Come prepared to stay forever." It was a promise that, in the darkest possible way, she always kept. Lonely, middle-aged Scandinavian immigrants, men with no local family ties, responded to her ads in droves. They saw Bell as a chance to escape a life of solitude and labor, to find comfort and companionship in their later years. They sold their farms, liquidated their assets, and traveled to LaPorte with thousands of dollars sewn into their clothes. One by one, they arrived at the train station and were met by Bell's farmhand, a man named Ray Lamphere. They were taken to the Gunnis farm, introduced to the charming widow, and then they vanished. Their families back in Minnesota, Wisconsin, or the Dakotas would receive a letter or two, and then silence. What happened to these men was a brutal, efficient process of slaughter and theft. After securing their money, Bell would murder them. Her methods were varied and gruesome. Some were poisoned with strychnine during a meal. Others were met with a hammer to the head as they slept. She was a woman of immense physical strength, more than capable of overpowering her victims. After they were dead, she would dismember their bodies in her cellar, a process made easier by her second husband's butchering tools. She would then bury the remains in her hog pen and in disturbed patches of earth around the property. The farm, with its rich, dark soil, became a mass grave. For several years, this horrifying system worked perfectly. Bell accumulated a significant fortune, estimated to be over $30,000, a vast sum for the time. She was careful to choose victims who were isolated, men whose disappearance would not be immediately noticed or investigated. She was a predator who understood the vulnerabilities of her prey. But she grew careless. In 1907, a man named Andrew Helgelien from South Dakota disappeared after going to visit Bell. Unlike her other victims, Andrew had a concerned brother, Assel Helgelien, who was persistent. When his letters to Andrew went unanswered, Assel wrote to Bell directly. She wrote back, claiming Andrew had left her farm and she didn't know where he had gone. Assel didn't believe her. He continued to write, threatening to come to LaPorte to investigate his brother's disappearance. Bell was now under pressure. She knew that a determined investigator could unravel her entire operation. At the same time, her relationship with her farmhand, Ray Lamphere, was souring. He was in love with her, but she had fired him and was publicly accusing him of being unstable. Belle sensed her world was about to collapse. She needed an escape plan. In the early morning hours of April 28, 1908, a fire broke out at the Gunnis farmhouse. The entire structure was quickly consumed by flames, burning down to its foundation. The community rushed to the scene, but it was too late. In the smoking ruins, investigators made a grim discovery in the cellar: the charred bodies of 4 individuals. They were identified as Belle's 3 children and 1 adult female, presumed to be Belle herself. The female body, however, was headless. The initial theory was that it was a tragic murder-suicide, perhaps carried out by the disgruntled farmhand Ray Lamphere. Lamphere was quickly arrested and charged with murder and arson. The community believed the case was closed. But Assel Helgelien, the brother of the missing suitor, was not satisfied. He arrived in LaPorte and insisted that his brother Andrew was buried somewhere on the property. He convinced the local sheriff to allow him to organize a search. On May 5, 1908, Assel and a group of local men began to dig in the soft, disturbed ground of the hog pen. It didn't take long before their shovels struck something solid. It was the dismembered body of Andrew Helgelien. The discovery turned the farm into a scene of frantic, horrifying excavation. Over the next few days, the search party unearthed a nightmare. They found body after body, some wrapped in burlap sacks, others crudely dismembered. They found the remains of men, women, and children. The quiet Indiana farm was revealed to be a graveyard. In total, they recovered the remains of at least 11 individuals, though the true number of victims is believed to be much higher, possibly as many as 40. LaPorte became the center of a media frenzy. The story of the murder farm and the Hell's Bell made headlines across the country. The farm became a grotesque tourist attraction, with thousands of people flocking to see the site of the horrific discoveries. The question on everyone's mind was, what happened to Belle Gunnis? As investigators examined the headless corpse found in the fire, doubts began to emerge. A local dentist claimed the dental work did not match Belle's records. Measurements of the corpse suggested it was significantly smaller than the famously large Belle. A theory began to form. Belle had faked her own death. She had murdered a transient woman, planted the body in the cellar with her children, and set the fire to cover her escape. Ray Lamphere's trial became a sensation. He was acquitted of murder, but found guilty of arson. On his deathbed a year later, he confessed his role to a fellow prisoner. He claimed that Belle was a prolific killer who had murdered dozens of suitors for their money. He admitted to helping her bury many of the bodies. And he confirmed the theory that she was still alive. Lamphere claimed that Belle had lured a woman from Chicago to the farm, murdered her, and used her body as a decoy. After setting the fire, Belle had fled with her fortune. His confession fueled a nationwide manhunt that would last for decades. Sightings of Belle Gunnis were reported all over the country, but she was never officially found. Did Belle Gunnis die in the fire, or did she pull off one of the most audacious escapes in criminal history? The mystery endures to this day. Her story is a chilling tale of greed, deception, and brutality, a dark chapter in the history of the American frontier. She was a monster who exploited the loneliness of others, turning the promise of the American dream into a gruesome and terrifying end. For our final story, we return across the Atlantic to the heart of the British Empire in the late 19th century. We enter the world of Victorian England, a society of stark contrasts. It is an age of industrial progress and imperial grandeur, but also of crushing poverty, rigid social mores, and a dark underbelly hidden beneath a veneer of respectability. It is in this world that our fourth killer, perhaps the most chilling of all, found her trade. She did not stalk her victims in the dark or lure them with promises of romance. She presented herself as a savior, a caretaker for the most vulnerable and voiceless members of society, infants. Her name was Amelia Dyer, and she was a baby farmer. In an era before legal adoption or reliable contraception, she was responsible for one of the most monstrous series of murders in British history. Baby farming was a grim business that arose out of Victorian society's harsh judgment of unmarried mothers. These fallen women faced social ruin, unemployment, and institutionalization. Desperate to keep their child a secret and to continue working, many would pay a lump sum to a farmer to take the infant off their hands, with the understanding that the child would be cared for and eventually placed with a good family. Some baby farmers were genuinely trying to provide a service, but the system was unregulated and ripe for exploitation. For the most unscrupulous, it was a simple and horrifying business model. Take the fee, dispose of the baby as quickly and cheaply as possible, and then take on another. This is the world that Amelia Dyer not only entered, but came to dominate. Born in 1837, Dyer's early life gave a hint of the darkness to come. Her mother suffered from severe mental illness, and Amelia was her primary caretaker, an experience that may have hardened her to the suffering of others. She trained as a nurse, a profession that gave her a veneer of medical authority and respectability. It also taught her how to handle death with a cold detachment. After being widowed and left with a child of her own, she turned to baby farming as a means of support. At first, she may have operated like many others, allowing the infants in her care to die through deliberate neglect, a practice known as starvation nursing. It was a slow, cruel death, but one that was difficult to prove as intentional murder, as infant mortality rates were tragically high. But this method was too slow, too risky, and not profitable enough for Amelia Dyer. She soon streamlined her process. She realized it was far more efficient to murder the babies immediately after receiving her fee, which was typically between 10 and 80 pounds, a considerable sum. She would advertise in local papers, presenting herself as a respectable, married couple willing to adopt a child. A desperate young mother, reading the ad, would see a lifeline. She would meet with the kindly, matronly Mrs. Dyer, who would coo over the baby and promise it a life of comfort and love in the countryside. The mother would hand over her child, her money, and a bundle of clothes, believing she had done the best she could. It was the last time she would ever see her child alive. As soon as the mother was gone, Dyer's facade would drop. Her method of murder was simple and brutally effective. She would take a length of white dressmaking tape and wrap it twice around the infant's neck, tying it in a tight knot. It was a quick, silent death. She preferred this method because, as she later stated, that was the way to tell if it was one of her children. For nearly 30 years, Amelia Dyer operated her murderous business. She was a phantom, constantly moving from town to town, using a string of different aliases to avoid suspicion. When rumors would start or a doctor would become too inquisitive, she would simply pack up and disappear, starting fresh in a new location. She moved between Bristol, Reading, and London, leaving a trail of dead infants in her wake. She was briefly caught and imprisoned, not for murder, but for neglect. She served a 6-month sentence of hard labor, an experience that nearly broke her. Upon her release, she decided to take even fewer chances. Instead of arranging for burials which could be traced, she began disposing of the bodies herself. She would wrap the small corpses in paper or cloth, weigh them down, and drop them into rivers, most notably the River Thames. She treated the disposal of human life with the detached efficiency of someone discarding household waste. The exact number of her victims is unknown, but based on the length of her career, it is estimated to be in the hundreds, making her one of the most prolific serial killers in history. The system that should have protected these children failed them completely. The police were often dismissive of reports of missing infants from fallen women. The mothers themselves were too frightened and ashamed to press for investigations. Amelia Dyer operated within the blind spots of a society that preferred to look the other way. But on March 30, 1896, her reign of terror began to unravel. A bargeman on the River Thames near Reading pulled a small brown paper parcel from the water. Inside, he found the decomposing body of a baby girl. A length of white tape was still wrapped tightly around her neck. The discovery itself was tragic, but not entirely uncommon. However, the police officer in charge, Detective Constable Anderson, noticed something crucial. On the sodden brown paper, he was able to make out a faint name and an address. It was the name of a Mrs. Thomas and an address in Reading. It was the tiny clue, preserved by chance, that would bring down the ogress of Reading. Investigators went to the address and began a painstaking investigation. They discovered that Mrs. Thomas was just one of the many aliases used by Amelia Dyer. They set up a sting operation, using a young woman to pose as a potential client. Dyer took the bait, and the police raided her home. At first, they found no bodies, but they did find a trove of damning evidence. They found stacks of newspaper advertisements for adoption. They found pawn tickets for children's clothing. They found letters from frantic mothers inquiring about their babies. And, most chillingly, they found a large supply of white dressmaking tape. The stench of human decomposition hung heavy in the house. The police realized that Dyer had not had time to dispose of her most recent victims. They dredged the Thames near her home and, over the next few days, pulled 6 more tiny bodies from the water, each one strangled with the signature white tape. Amelia Dyer was arrested and charged with murder. The investigation revealed the true scale of her operation. They traced dozens of mothers who had given their children to Dyer, none of whom had ever been seen again. The case became a national scandal, exposing the dark, hidden world of baby farming to a horrified public. Dyer's trial was swift. She attempted a defense of insanity, but the prosecution painted a picture of a cold, calculating, and methodical killer who was motivated by pure greed. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury took only 4.5 minutes to find her guilty. On June 10, 1896, Amelia Dyer was hanged at Newgate Prison. Her last words were reportedly, "I have nothing to say." She showed no remorse, no flicker of emotion for the hundreds of lives she had extinguished. She was a monster created and sustained by a society's cruelty towards its most vulnerable members. Her case led to stricter laws and regulations regarding adoption and childcare, a small flicker of progress born from an immense tragedy. The story of Amelia Dyer serves as a terrifying testament to the evil that can flourish when society chooses to avert its gaze from the inconvenient and the powerless. She was not just a killer, she was a symptom of a diseased system. We have journeyed through the darkest corridors of history. We have stood in the shadow of a French nobleman's castle, a place where heroism curdled into unimaginable sadism. We have traveled the perilous roads of India, where faith became a justification for systematic slaughter. We have walked the grounds of a lonely American farm, where the promise of a new life was a lure into a shallow grave. And we have peered into the grim parlors of Victorian England, where a caregiver's touch became an instrument of death. Gilles de Rais, Thug Barham, Belle Gunness, Amelia Dyer. 4 names, separated by time and place, yet bound together by a common thread of profound inhumanity. Their stories are unsettling not just because of the acts they committed, but because of what they reveal about the worlds they inhabited. They show us that monsters are not always outsiders. They are often products of their time, thriving in the spaces created by war, chaos, social hypocrisy, and indifference. Gilles de Rais was enabled by the absolute power of the feudal system. Thug Barham was a high priest in a deeply rooted culture of ritual violence. Belle Gunness exploited the isolation and hope of the immigrant experience. Amelia Dyer profited from a society that punished and ostracized unmarried mothers. Their evil did not exist in a vacuum. It was nurtured by the very fabric of their societies. These stories serve as a vital, if terrifying, reminder. The evil we know, the killers whose names are famous, are but a fraction of the story. History is filled with hidden monsters, their tales buried by the passage of time, their victims' cries long since silenced. By unearthing their stories, we do more than simply catalog the horrors of the past. We honor the memory of the forgotten victims, the countless men, women, and children whose lives were stolen by these predators. And we arm ourselves with a more complete understanding of the nature of evil itself. It is a force that changes its mask with the times, but its core, a chilling lack of empathy, an insatiable appetite for destruction, remains eternal. The shadows of history are long, and they are deep, and they will always have more stories to tell.